I'm Danielle Dean. I'm a visual artist. I really think about how media shapes the way we live or how we work. What makes us human, to me, is not necessarily totally essential or biological, but really comes from stuff around us, like advertising, films. And the way I investigate that is by looking at archives of media such as advertising. Then I take those materials and I think about them in a speculative way. In the case of the Ford adverts, it started because I was living in Detroit, and you feel Ford everywhere there because obviously that's where Henry Ford started a lot of the car factories. A lot of people own Ford cars there, and there's a lot of pride in that history. But after a while, I was like, oh, my interest in thinking about systems of capitalism and the ways in which Fordism is really a part of that, it was like I couldn't ignore it. I was really drawn to the Ford adverts because they are really creative, like the early ones that are painted. They're almost Disney-like. And so that was the first thing that really intrigued me. And then also the repetitive images of landscape and white people. There's this production of desire that involves depictions of place and land. If you buy a car, you'd be able to consume this landscape from the safety of your car. Spaces that seem like you could get in your car and drive to the west and have an adventure in these like supposed untouched lands, which was a complete myth, but it feels like they were really building on or involved in the American dream, which is entangled with capitalism and racial division. In the animation Long Low Line Fordland, I looked at an archive of adverts from roughly, I think, around 1910 until the present. And so the animation goes through these different depictions of landscape with the car extracted from it, so that then you can think about, well, there's an influence on the way in which we see or the way in which we relate to landscape in regards to representation. And then it feels a bit like an assembly line as well, because it's like rolling along in a straight line as if maybe you were either in the car or it's like a conveyor belt of landscape. For the animation, it was really about taking the audience through my fascination of the landscapes and then also connecting it a little bit back to Disney as well, because there's this relationship between the representation of landscape in Disney films that for me reminded me of some of these Ford car ads. And Walt Disney really admired Henry Ford and organized a lot of his animation studios based on the assembly line. So that was fascinating to me too, that these movies I grew up watching Bambi and Snow White, and I would never look at them and think about this Fordist, rationalist way of making these images. To me, there's a contradiction in a way between that illusion of creativity and the rational organization and the alienation that maybe some of the workers felt in the production of the work. And so what I did was split up the landscapes in the adverts into these different layers and took the car out. So they were drawn from the source material and then painted in watercolor. And then they actually scanned high res so that they can become digital. So the multi-plane aspect of it was done digitally. Essentially, I ended up using a similar strategy of making space that Walt Disney used. There is one moment where it actually breaks the logic of rolling in one direction and goes forward and goes into some archival material of Fordlandia. Fordlandia was a plantation or a kind of work camp that Henry Ford set up in the Brazilian Amazon. He wanted to control all aspects of production, and in this case, it was yielding of rubber to produce tires. And so the importance that I wanted to bring that in is that it's a kind of real case of abstraction of raw materials that Ford was involved in. Loads of things went wrong. It wasn't just about how they did not listen to indigenous knowledge about how to deal with the forests, but it was also how they not only wanted to bring the assembly line, but they also wanted to create the ideal worker, which is like an amazing case study or an extreme form of how we take certain organizations of labor to be, the way it is, but it isn't everywhere and it wasn't always the case. And so the work reflects on the relationship between global capitalism and the production of race through neo-colonial extraction. I am American. I was born here, but I grew up in England. And so, it feels particularly special to me to be in this biennial because it's not just about America in a local sense. It's about Americanism in a kind of cultural output that does get expanded globally. And that's exciting to me, particularly to be able to have the chance to show work in a biennial that isn't just celebrating America, but is critical or questioning of what that means, and also isn't just local. It's a real global conversation.